Mathematics essentially consists of two fundamental things: numbers, and there's all kinds of numbers, there's many different types, and geometry. And most of you have heard of probably both numbers and geometry. Indeed, I'm assuming that you have some basic mathematics background. So if you don't know anything about numbers, this won't be for you, but you know something about numbers, and you probably know something about geometry. You've heard of things like triangles and squares and things like that. And numbers and geometry are really the foundation of mathematics, and it turns out that you use numbers to understand geometry, and you use geometry to understand numbers. And then it isn't very long until you begin to study something called algebra, because this is really a set of techniques for solving problems using numbers and geometry. And then there is a little more advanced subject that they talk about in high school called trigonometry, where you begin to put together things that you've learned from numbers and geometry together with some algebra and put it all together into this more advanced subject. And all of this together is called pre-calculus mathematics, because after you study these things, then you usually study something called calculus. And this was a math subject that was invented about 300 years ago and becomes the basis for modern science and technology. And it's part of a larger subject that's called analysis. And then in turn, there are many, many mathematical subjects and disciplines that grow out of that. So you would probably, in this modern world today, in the early 21st century, you would probably study pre-calculus math in high school. You might get into some calculus, and then you would study it again in college, and then go on from there. And pretty much, we're going to be talking about these things in these videos, although I will do some things in these videos for certain more advanced students that will go well beyond what you normally would get in a typical treatment of it. As a matter of fact, these videos are really aimed at different categories of people. I'm going to start out with a set of videos that I believe are for everyone. I think anybody will benefit from these and enjoy them and learn from them. And if you study the things that are in the everyone videos, I think that you're going to be able to do a lot with math and solve a lot of everyday problems that you might run into. Then I'm going to have a set of videos for what I call serious students, SS videos. And these are people that go beyond the everyday math and want to use it in a deeper way. And this would include students that are in high school or college or engineering school and that want to know more about math than they necessarily have to have for just what I call everyday math. And then I'm going to have some topics for what I would call advanced students. And these are people that really want to know even more than the serious students. They want to get deeper and deeper into it. And then I'm going to have some special topics that I call business math for people that are interested in business, but not necessarily would need it if they're just doing everyday stuff. Now, altogether, there's going to be, at least planned, a lot of different videos on subjects that will fall into these categories. And so but I invite you to get started with the everyday ones. And as I told you earlier, it's going to be presented just sort of like I'm doing this, very informally. One of the things that we're going to do that's quite important that I want to mention to you is that we're going to use in our studies a calculator. Now, there's sort of a controversy, or there has been historically, about whether you should use calculators when you're learning mathematics. And I am a firm believer that you absolutely need to use a calculator when you learn math, because it will make learning math much more enjoyable, and you'll be able to learn a lot more math a lot quicker when you use a calculator. Certainly when I studied math, calculators hadn't even been invented yet, and so we had to learn to do things with pencil and paper, and we had to use a lot of techniques that were cumbersome to learn, difficult to learn. We had to have lookup tables for a lot of things. And learning mathematics was very arduous. I can teach you things today, now that we have calculators, in just a few minutes that would have taken hours and been very laborious and arduous before we had calculators. There are a lot of different calculators one could use. I'll just show you a few examples here. These are some Texas Instruments calculators. This is the TX36 Solar. This is the TI-30X2S. And I actually kind of played around with these to see which ones I wanted to use for these series of videos. And I finally settled on the TI-30XA. It's not a very expensive calculator. It costs about $11 or $12 in most stores. And it's very easy to use, and it has a lot of functionality. In fact, I can teach you just about everything I want to in the everyday math with this calculator, and it's very easy to use. So I would encourage you, if you like these videos, to get this calculator and start following along with it and do the math as I'm doing it. Of course, if you have a different calculator, you can use it, but you might have to make some adjustments. Now, if you want a reference to study, I will give you a reference of a great teacher that was very beneficial to me. As I mentioned to you earlier, I got involved in teaching math as well as learning math when I was about 15 years old. And I continued to study math really the rest of my life, and I taught it for about 20 years, both individually at the kitchen table, as I told you, but also in classroom environments. And I've taught math all the way from vocational math and 8th and 9th grade math all the way through graduate school. And one of the great teachers that I found was a man named George Simmons. This is a book that I taught out of some years ago when I was teaching an advanced subject of math called Topology and Functional Analysis. And this book is a great book. George Simmons is the name of the author, and it's a really super book. And I taught out of it. It was actually a first-year graduate level course that we were teaching on topology and the introduction to functional analysis. It turns out that Professor Simmons also then wrote a very fine book on what's called differential equations, which is something that comes as part of analysis, but it comes after calculus. And then he wrote an excellent book on calculus. I don't happen to have those two books handy to show you, but the one I really do want to show you, for those of you that are beginners and wanting to learn pre-calculus math, is George wrote a book called Pre-Calculus Mathematics in a Nutshell. The same George Simmons that wrote those other books. And this is a marvelous little book. It's been republished now, brought out by Barnes & Noble. The first version I had was a little white paperback, and then Barnes & Noble came out with this version. I think this version's out of print now. I still have many copies I bought that I give away to kids today when they're wanting to learn more math and they want a book. Geometry, algebra, and trigonometry all covered in this book. And he quite correctly claims that he can teach a student very quickly what they need to know in these subjects very quickly. There's about 15 pages devoted to geometry, then a whole lot of problems, and then there's about 40 pages maybe devoted or so to algebra and some additional more advanced topics, and then trigonometry for another 20 pages. And it's a remarkable book. In fact, there are things in this book that I can almost guarantee you, if you are a mathematics teacher, a high school math teacher, there are things in that book that you probably don't know that you will find useful and enlightening. Now, I'm not going to, in any sense of the word, try to reproduce George's book. What I'm going to do is to try to just sit at the kitchen table with you, as it were, and teach you things that you will find interesting, I believe, that are kind of hard to learn from just reading about them. And they're also hard to learn in a classroom if you don't have the right kind of a situation or teacher. So this will be in lieu of that.